The wind carried a restless whisper across the wide plains, stirring the dust that clung to the worn wooden fences and crooked porches of the old village. Horses snorted in the distance, their hooves striking the hard-packed earth as if echoing. The unease that lived in every corner of town. Folks here walked with wary eyes, shoulders bent as though carrying the weight of something unsaid. The village had always been quiet, but lately silence had turned heavy like a secret pressing. Against the ribs of everyone who called it home, among the weathered cabins and smoke from evening fires, stood a house at the far edge of the settlement. Its shutters rattled in the wind, its porch sagged with age, and yet, behind its worn walls lived a young woman whose spirit could not be dimmed by fading wood or shadowed halls. Her eyes carried the spark of dreams larger than the horizon, though. Her voice was often softened by the weight of obedience. She had grown up learning to do as she was told, to smile when expected, and to lower her gaze when authority demanded. But deep inside, her heart beat with the rhythm of freedom, wild and untamed. Like the land itself, her father was a stern man, hard as the bark of the oak trees he chopped for firewood. For him, tradition was not a choice but a chain, one he believed his daughter must wear for the sake of their family's honor. He spoke little of love and less of dreams, but he often spoke of duty. And in the name of duty, he had promised her hand to a man twice her age, a man whose reputation traveled before him like storm clouds gathering over the prairie. He was known for his wealth, his cattle, and his iron will. He wanted her, not for her heart, but for the bond she would secure between families. The village called it a practical union. She called it a prison. Night after night, she sat by the window of her small room, staring out into the rolling dark hills. The moonlight draped the fields in silver, and in the distance, the cry of coyotes pierced the air. Each sound made her wonder what lay beyond the boundaries of her village, beyond her father's reach, beyond the promise that trapped her future. There had to be more. There had to be another way, but fate has a way of arriving uninvited. One evening, as the villagers gathered at the square to trade goods and share whispers, the sound of hoofbeats thundered down the dusty road. All heads turned. From the shadows of the tall cottonwoods emerged riders unlike the townsfolk, their silhouettes sharp against the setting sun. Among them rode a figure who drew every gaze without a word. His presence was fierce, carved from the wild, his eyes dark and steady like the deep canyons. He was Apache, one of the people the village both feared and respected. The air grew thick with tension. Mothers pulled their children closer, men shifted uneasily, and the elder raised his voice to greet them with formal caution. Yet the stranger said nothing at first. His gaze, unshaken, swept across the gathering until it found her. She felt the weight of his stare like fire, though she did not flinch. For reasons she could not name, she held his eyes longer than she should have. Rumors already swirled through the village. Some said the Apache had come seeking land, others said revenge. Few dared to believe what her heart suspected, that he had come with a purpose tied to her fate. When he finally spoke, his voice was low but strong, a promise woven into every word. "I'll save you from a forced marriage with him," he declared, his tone leaving no room for doubt. "But in the end, you will be my wife." A hush fell over the crowd. Her father's face turned red with fury, the villagers gasped, and the man she was promised to clenched his fists in rage. But she felt a chill and a heat all at once, as if her life had just shifted beneath her feet. That night she could not sleep. His vow replayed in her mind, every syllable echoing like the beat of war drums. What kind of rescue was this? Was he her savior, or another cage waiting to close around her? She wanted freedom, not another man's claim. And yet, there was something in his eyes that unsettled her, a strength, yes, but also a strange kind of truth that made her heart race in ways she had never known. The village was restless in the days that followed. Men spoke of alliances, threats, and wars. Women whispered about forbidden unions and fate's cruel designs. Every shadow seemed longer, every silence sharper. Her father ordered her to remain inside, but her thoughts no longer fit within the walls of her room. She began sneaking glances toward the horizon, waiting, wondering if the Apache would return. And when he did, the village would never be the same. The land itself seemed to sense the coming storm. The skies darkened earlier each evening, winds bent the grass low, and the river ran colder than before. Change was near, though none could predict what shape it would take. She tried to tell herself that she hated his vow, that his words were nothing but chains spoken aloud. Yet deep in the quiet of her heart, she knew something else. His vow was not merely about possession. It was a challenge to the world that sought to cage her. A promise that no matter the cost, she would not be given to a man she did not choose. And so, caught between fear and hope, she stood at the edge of a story larger than herself. The old American village, with its wagons, lanterns, and whispered laws, was about to witness a battle not only of men but of destinies. And in the center of it all stood a young woman and the Apache whose vow would test the limits of love, freedom, and fate itself. The night before her wedding was set to take place, the sky erupted with a storm. Thunder cracked across the valley, lightning illuminated the ridges, and rain pounded the earth as if the heavens themselves opposed what was about to unfold. Inside her room, she pressed her forehead to the glass, whispering a silent plea to the night. Somewhere out there, she knew he was waiting. And when the door to her chamber creaked open, she turned, not sure if it would be her father, the man she was promised to, or the Apache come to claim his vow. The storm roared louder, drowning out the sound of her heartbeat. As the figure stepped into the shadows of her room, the figure stood framed in the dim glow of the lantern, the storm's light spilling across the room in flashes. For one breathless moment, she could not move. The air between them felt alive, charged with something she did not have a name for. The stranger's shadow filled the doorway, his stance steady, unbothered by the roar of thunder. It was him, the Apache. His gaze locked on hers, and she felt her fear twist into something heavier, something that stirred in her chest like a restless bird. He said nothing at first, but his silence spoke more than words could. He had come, just as he vowed. Her lips parted, but no sound left her throat. She thought of her father in the next room, of the man she was meant to marry gathering, his men to secure the union, of the village waiting for morning to crown her as a bride in chains. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to tell him to leave before he destroyed them both. Yet her heart refused to push him away. Instead, she found herself whispering a single question. "Why me?" His jaw tightened. He stepped further into the room, closing the distance. His presence carried the weight of the wild, as though the land itself had shaped him. He did not smile, but his voice, when it came, was low, steady, and unshaken by the storm. "Because you are not theirs to take. I have seen what they plan, and I will not let it happen." His eyes burned with conviction, but beneath it, she caught a flicker of something else, pain, maybe, or memory. Before she could answer, a floorboard creaked in the hall. Her father's heavy boots scraped against the wood, drawing closer. The Apache slipped into the shadow by the window, vanishing like smoke. She held her breath, clutching her nightdress as her father pushed the door open. His eyes swept the room, stern and suspicious. "Why are you awake?" "You should be resting," he said, his tone sharp but tired. She forced herself to nod, lowering her gaze, hiding the storm inside her. When he left, she dared to glance at the window again, but the Apache was gone. Only the rain remained, racing down the glass. Sleep never came to her that night. She lay awake, listening to the storm fade into silence, her thoughts chasing themselves in circles. She did not know if she feared him or trusted him. She only knew that his vow had changed everything. The life her father promised no longer felt like an unbroken path, it now felt like a cliff edge. And she was standing on the very brink. Days passed with unease that clung to the air like morning mist. The village busied itself with preparations for the wedding. Women sewed garments and whispered about her future. Men hauled barrels of ale and sharpened tools, pretending not to hear the rumors of the Apache's vow. Children, with eyes wide and curious, repeated the words they had overheard, their voices carrying fragments of the truth no one dared speak aloud. She moved through it all like a ghost. Every stitch of her gown, every bow of ribbon tied for decoration felt like a thread, binding her to a fate she could not escape. But deep inside, the ember of resistance burned brighter. She began to notice things she had not before: the sharpness in her father's voice when he spoke of alliances, the greed in her would-be husband's eyes when he looked at her, the silence of villagers who pitied her but said nothing. She also began to notice the signs left at the edge of the village, hoofprints in the dirt where no horse should have been, a feather caught in the fence, the fleeting shadow of someone watching from the tree line. One evening, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in streaks of red and gold, she wandered to the river that wound its way just beyond the settlement. The current whispered against the rocks, carrying secrets downstream. She stood there, hugging herself against the chill, when she heard the soft tread of footsteps behind her. She spun, heart pounding, and found him there again. The Apache stood a few paces away, as though he had always belonged to the wilderness that cradled the river. His dark hair clung damp to his shoulders, his eyes unreadable in the fading light. For a long moment, they simply stared at one another, the quiet filled only by the rush of water and the call of distant birds. "You should not be here," she said finally, though her voice lacked the firmness she intended. "Neither should you," he answered, his tone calm but edged with something deeper. "They keep you caged, and soon they will lock the door forever. Do you want that?" The question struck her like a blade. She wanted to say no, to shout her refusal, but fear tangled her tongue. She thought of her father's stern warnings, of the danger this man represented, of the whispers that called his people enemies. And yet, when she looked at him, she did not see an enemy. She saw the first glimpse of freedom she had ever known. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice breaking. For a moment, he did not answer. He looked out over the river, as if searching for words among the currents. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Because I know what it is to have your life stolen before it begins. I will not watch it happen again." Something inside her shifted, though she could not name it. She wanted to believe him, yet trust was a fragile thing, and fear clung to her like a second skin. She did not move closer, but she did not walk away. They stood there, two worlds divided, yet bound by a thread neither could sever. When she returned to the village that night, her father was waiting. His face was dark with suspicion, his voice sharp. "You've been gone too long. Where were you?" She stammered an excuse, claiming she went to gather water, but his eyes narrowed. He knew more than she wished he did. He warned her that the Apache were dangerous, that their promises were traps. He spoke of duty again, of sacrifice, of loyalty to family. She nodded, but inside, his words felt hollow, like echoes in an empty barn. As the days drew closer to the wedding, the tension in the village grew. The man she was promised to began to visit more often, his presence heavy, his words coated with false kindness. He spoke of wealth, of power, of how fortunate she was to be chosen. She smiled where she had to, bowed her head when expected, but every word sank like stone in her chest. At night, she would remember the Apache's vow, his eyes like burning coals in the dark, and she would feel that restless bird inside her beating its wings. The night before the ceremony, the village gathered for a feast. Lanterns hung from trees, fires roared in the square, and music filled the air. But beneath the laughter and clinking mugs was a silence unspoken, a watchfulness that weighed heavy. She sat among the women, her gown laid across her lap, while men drank and her father watched her every move. But even there, she felt it, the prickle of eyes from the shadows, the presence waiting beyond the circle of firelight. When the night wore on and the fires burned low, she slipped away. The path to her house was quiet, lined with the scent of smoke and pine. She pushed open her door, the silence thick, and stepped into her room. And then, once more, she felt it, the same charge in the air, the same weight of presence. The Apache stood by her window again, the moonlight carving his features into stone. This time he did not wait for her to speak. His voice was firm, carrying the storm of a promise unbroken. Tomorrow they will try to bind you, but I will not let them. Be ready. Her breath caught. Fear and hope tangled until she could not tell them apart. She wanted to demand how, why, what it meant. But before she could, the door to her room creaked, her father's voice calling her name, sharp and suspicious. She turned, her heart racing, but when she looked back at the window, the Apache was gone once more like a shadow swallowed by the night. Her father stepped into the room, his eyes narrowing as he studied her face. She forced a steady breath, clutching her gown tighter, pretending nothing was amiss. But inside, the storm raged. Tomorrow would change everything. She did not know if it would be her salvation or her ruin. She only knew one thing for certain: the Apache would come. And when he did, no one in the village would forget it. Morning came with a heavy stillness, the kind that felt unnatural, like the air itself was holding its breath. The sun climbed slow and pale, its light filtering through the clouds in weak streaks. The village stirred with the sound of wagon wheels, clattering pots, and voices weaving together in a rhythm of preparation. Today was the day her life was to be bound to a man she did not love. She sat at her window, staring out across the fields as the dew clung to the grass, her heart pounding with a mix of dread and anticipation. Somewhere beyond the tree line, she imagined the Apache waiting, unseen but near. Just as he had promised. Her father moved through the house like a general before battle. His boots struck the floor with purpose, his voice rose and fell with orders, and his hands gestured sharply to anyone who hesitated. For him, this marriage was more than tradition. It was survival. To bind their family with one of the wealthiest men in the territory meant security, power, and the protection of their name. He would not allow doubt, nor listen to whispers of the Apache's vow. Yet even he could not silence the unease that rippled through the village. Men spoke quietly as they carried benches to the square. They remembered the stranger's eyes, the certainty in his words. Some thought him reckless, others thought him fearless. A few wondered if he had more power than they could see. Still, they kept their doubts behind tight lips, afraid to speak of it where the elder might hear. The bridegroom, dressed in a fine coat, arrived before noon. He carried himself with the confidence of one who believed the world was his to command. His hair was combed back, his boots polished, and his smile stretched wide, though it did not reach his eyes. When he looked at her, it was not with affection, but with the pride of possession. She felt his gaze like chains wrapping tighter, each glance a reminder of the cage being built around her. He placed a hand on her father's shoulder, nodding with satisfaction, already treating her as though she were his property. She did not speak. Her silence became her shield, her only weapon against the storm rising within her. She remembered the Apache's vow, every word seared into her mind. "Be ready," he had said. She did not know what he meant. nor how he planned to stop what was coming, but she clung to the thought like a lifeline. Meanwhile, beyond the edge of the village, the Apache watched from the shadows of the tall pines. He had been there since dawn, his horse tethered in the brush, his eyes fixed on the settlement below. The sound of drums and laughter drifted faintly to where he stood. His people had warned him of the danger. This was not his fight, not his land, not his village. Yet he could not turn away. The girl's face haunted him, her eyes carrying the same fire he once saw in another life, one he had lost to betrayal and force. To him, this was more than saving a stranger. It was defying the same chains that had broken him. Inside the village, the feast began. Tables groaned under the weight of roasted meat, fresh bread, and barrels of ale. Music played, fiddles and drums weaving a rhythm that tried to disguise the tension lingering beneath. Children laughed and danced, unaware of the storm gathering. Women adjusted her gown, their fingers tugging at ribbons, smoothing creases, whispering encouragement that felt hollow. She stood like a doll being dressed, her body present, but her spirit far away. Her closest friend, a girl with kind eyes and quick hands, leaned in to whisper, "Do you want this?" The question was dangerous, but it slipped out, her compassion outweighing caution. She swallowed hard, her eyes glistening, and shook her head ever so slightly. The friend's hand lingered on hers, a silent show of support. Though both knew there was little she could do, the elder raised his hands, calling for silence. His voice carried across the square, solemn and heavy with tradition. He spoke of unity, of family, of duty. He praised the bridegroom for his wealth and strength, and he praised her father for his loyalty to the community. When he spoke of her, his words were polite but distant, as if she were an object of ceremony rather than a living soul. She stood still, her hands trembling within the folds of her gown as the ceremony began. Eyes shifted, not only to the couple but to the edges of the crowd, to the shadows that lingered just beyond. Whispers rose like wind through grass. Was he here? Would he come? The tension coiled tighter with each passing moment, the villagers torn between fear of what might happen and dread of what would not. Then came the first interruption. A boy burst into the square, his face pale, his breath ragged. "Riders!" he cried, pointing toward the ridge. Heads turned, voices rose, and the music stilled. Dust swirled in the distance, the shapes of horses moving swiftly through the fields. Hearts pounded as the villagers clutched their children, men reaching instinctively for rifles. But when the riders drew closer, it was not war that followed. A small group of travelers passed by, their wagons creaking, their faces weary. They meant no harm, only seeking passage. Relief spread like a sigh, but the damage was done. The villagers' nerves were frayed, the moment broken. The elder cleared his throat, urging the ceremony forward. Though unease lingered in every eye, the bridegroom gripped her arm tighter, as though to claim her before anyone else could interfere. His fingers dug into her skin, his smile stiff. She flinched, her gaze darting toward the horizon, silently begging for the vow to be fulfilled. Her father watched her carefully, suspicion in his eyes. He, too, was waiting for something, though he prayed it would never come as the vows were spoken. The Apache slipped closer through the trees, his every step measured. He could see her now, standing in the square, her face pale but her eyes alive with fire. He could see the man beside her, smug and possessive, and he could see the father, rigid with pride and fear. The Apache's hand tightened around the reins of his horse, his resolve hardening. He had sworn to stop this, but the cost was heavy. To break their laws meant war. To take her meant a fight not just with men, but with an entire way of life. And yet, as he watched her lips form the words of vows she did not believe, his heart gave him no choice. In the crowd, others noticed it too. The friend's eyes darted to the trees, spotting movement no one else dared acknowledge. The groomsmen shifted uneasily, their instincts sharp, their hands hovering near their belts. The elder's voice faltered for just a breath, though he pressed on, determined to complete the ritual. The village held its breath again, caught between tradition and the unknown, and then came the sound, the distant echo of a hawk's cry, sharp and piercing, cutting through the ceremony like a blade. She turned her head instinctively toward it, her heart leaping. It was not just a bird, it was a sign. She knew it, though no one else understood. The Apache was near, and the promise he made was about to be tested. Still, he did not emerge. Not yet. He lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting for the moment when choice and chance would collide. The tension grew unbearable. The villagers whispered, the groom tightened his grip, and her father's eyes darted about, searching for a threat he could not name. She stood frozen in the middle of it all, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths, her mind torn between fear of what might come and the unbearable weight of what would happen if nothing did. The elder lifted his hand for the final blessing, his voice rising above the uneasy murmurs. The villagers bowed their heads, but she did not. Her eyes remained fixed on the tree line where she imagined him standing, waiting, ready to break the world apart if he must. And in that moment, with the blessing on the elder's lips and the groom's hand tightening on hers, she heard it again, not the cry of a hawk this time, but the unmistakable sound of hooves pounding the earth. Steady, fierce, drawing closer with each heartbeat. The villagers looked up, their eyes wide, their breath catching. The Apache was coming. The pounding of hooves grew louder, rolling like thunder across the open land. Every head in the square turned toward the sound, eyes wide, breaths caught. The music stopped, the fiddle silenced mid-note. The elder froze, his blessing caught in his throat. Mothers pulled their children close, men reached for rifles propped against benches, and the groom's hand crushed tighter around her wrist as if he feared she might vanish before him. Dust rose on the horizon, curling into the air like smoke, and through it came the figure every soul in the village had dreaded and yet secretly expected. The Apache. He rode with a steady force, his horse dark against the pale dirt, his body tall and unyielding. His eyes did not waver, fixed straight ahead, as though no man in that square had power enough to block his path. The vow he had spoken in whispers and shadows now thundered openly, carried not in words but in the rhythm of each strike of hooves. Her heart raced wildly, torn between terror and hope. She could not look away. The closer he came, the more her world shifted. This was no longer whispers at the river or shadows in her window. This was the vow made flesh, demanding to be reckoned with. The groom cursed under his breath, shoving her behind him as though shielding property. Her father barked orders for the men to hold their ground, his voice tight with fear hidden beneath pride. The elder raised trembling hands, calling for calm. Though his words faltered in the air, the Apache slowed his horse at the edge of the square. The dust swirled around him, catching in the sunlight, casting his presence in a haze both real and unreal. He dismounted in one fluid motion, boots striking the earth with a finality that sent a ripple through the crowd. The silence was sharp, brittle, ready to shatter. "I said I would come," he spoke, his voice steady, carrying across the gathering with the weight of stone. His gaze swept the villagers but landed on her. She felt her breath catch, her pulse stuttering. There was no question in his tone, no hesitation. His vow was alive in every syllable. Her father stepped forward, his jaw tight, his eyes burning. "You have no right here," he said, though his voice trembled at the edges. "This is not your land, not your people. Leave now, before you bring war upon us all." The Apache did not flinch. "It is not war one bring, it is truth." "You would give her to a man she does not choose." "I will not allow it." Gasps echoed through the square. His words were dangerous, his defiance bold. The villagers shifted uneasily, caught between fear of their elder and the fire in the stranger's voice. The groom, red with rage, shoved forward. "She is mine. Promised by her father, sealed by this union, you have no claim." The Apache's eyes darkened. A promise made without her voice is no promise at all. Her chest tightened. No one had ever spoken for her like this, not even she had dared. She felt the ground shift beneath her, the walls of her cage cracking, though the bars remained. Her father turned to her, his eyes sharp with warning. "Tell him," he commanded. "Tell him you belong here with the man chosen for you." The villagers leaned in, silence thick, waiting for her answer. Her lips parted, but no words came. The weight of every gaze crushed her, fear choking her throat. She wanted to scream the truth, to cry out that she did not belong to anyone, but her voice betrayed her, trembling silent. Her father's hand gripped her arm, urging, demanding. The groom sneered, certain of victory. And then, from the edge of the crowd, her friend spoke. "She does not want this." The words were soft but clear, slicing through the silence like a blade. Head snapped toward the girl, eyes wide with shock. Her father roared in fury, but the damage was done. The secret was no longer hidden. The villagers saw the truth in her eyes, the truth she could not speak aloud. The Apache stepped closer, his presence unyielding. "You hear it now, she will not be bound." His hand rested on the hilt of the knife at his belt, not yet drawn, but the threat unspoken was clear. The groom's men bristled, their hands hovering near rifles. The villagers tensed, torn between protecting tradition and avoiding bloodshed. The elder's voice cracked as he pleaded for calm, but no one listened. The square trembled with the weight of what was about to unfold. She felt her knees weaken, her breath shallow. This was the edge of the cliff she had dreamed of, the moment when chains could shatter or tighten forever. She looked at her father, his face a storm of pride and fear. She looked at the groom, his grip iron, his eyes cold with possession. And then she looked at the Apache, his gaze steady, his vow unbroken. The storm inside her rose higher than ever before. She could not remain silent any longer. Her lips trembled, and though her voice was faint, it carried. "I do not want this," the square erupted. Shouts rang out, some in outrage, some in shock. Her father's roar shook the air. Groom cursed violently, and the Apache's hand tightened on his knife. Men surged forward, women pulled children back. The elder shouted until his voice broke, but the tide had already turned. The groom lunged, pulling her roughly toward him as if her words meant nothing. She cried out, her arm twisted painfully. In his grip, in that instant, the Apache moved. His knife flashed, not striking yet, but warning, forcing the groom to stop. The two men faced each other, eyes locked, the weight of the entire village pressing in on them. The tension was unbearable. Every villager knew what one wrong move could unleash. A single strike, a single shot, and blood would stain the square. Families would be torn, alliances shattered, the fragile peace of the village destroyed. And still no one moved, frozen. In the moment before the storm breaks, she stood between them, her chest rising and falling with desperate breaths. She had spoken her truth, but the cost of it was about to unfold before her eyes. The Apache's vow had become her shield, but it also threatened to ignite a fire no one could contain. Her father's fury was a storm, her groom's rage a blade, and the Apache's defiance a spark. The air thickened, every heartbeat loud in the silence that followed. The elder raised his hands again, his voice shaking, begging for reason. But reason had no place here. This was no longer about vows or blessings. This was about power, freedom, and the collision of two worlds that could not exist together. The Apache's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "She is not yours to take." The groom's voice answered, sharp and venomous. "Then try to take her from me." The square held its breath. The storm was no longer distant. It had arrived, and in that moment, with the villagers trembling, her father shouting, the groom gripping tight, and the Apache poised like the edge of a blade, she knew the world was about to break apart. The climax had not yet come, but its shadow loomed heavy, pressing down on every soul. She felt it in her bones, in the trembling of the earth beneath her feet, in the pounding of her heart. Whatever happened next would change everything: her fate, the village, perhaps even the land itself. The Apache's eyes flickered to hers once more, steady, burning, unshaken. His vow was alive, and he would see it through. The next breath would decide it all. The square was still, but only for a breath. The groom's face twisted with fury as he yanked her closer, his grip bruising her wrist. The Apache's knife flashed upward in warning, the edge catching the sunlight. The air split with a scream as a villager shouted for peace. But it was too late. The storm had broken. The groom drew his pistol, the metal glinting cold and sharp. A cry rose from the crowd as mothers pulled their children back and men scrambled for their rifles. Before the trigger could be pulled, the Apache lunged. His hand struck the weapon aside, sending it clattering into the dirt. The two men collided, locked in a furious struggle, the crowd circling but too afraid to intervene. Her father shouted, his voice drowned in the roar of chaos, and the elder stumbled forward, begging for calm. But calm no longer had a place here. Fell back against the table, her breath coming fast. Fear gripped her, yet so did something else: resolve. She could not stand frozen anymore, not when her life and the lives around her teetered on the edge of ruin. She cried out, her voice sharp and desperate, "Stop enough?" But her words were lost in the crash of fists and the clash of bodies. The Apache moved like a storm given shape, his strength raw, every strike a promise that he would not yield. The groom fought with rage, but his movements were heavy, fueled more by greed than honor. Dust swirled around them, villagers shouting, torn between tradition and change. Her father surged forward, but her friend caught his arm, pleading through tears. "Let her choose," she begged. Her father froze, his eyes wide with disbelief, the weight of his own pride crumbling beneath the sight of his daughter's terror. The fight ended in a heartbeat of silence. The groom fell hard into the dirt, blood streaking his lip, his eyes wild with rage, but his body broken by the force of the Apache's strikes. The knife hovered at his throat, the final question trembling in the air. The villagers gasped, waiting, fearing the end. The Apache's chest heaved, his gaze locked on the man beneath him. And then, with a slow and steady breath, he lowered the blade. "No," he said, his voice deep, steady, and final. "I will not stain this day with his blood. But she will not be yours." The groom spat, his pride shattered. He shoved himself to his feet, glaring at her with a venom that made her shiver. "You'll regret this," he hissed, but no one stepped forward to support him. Even his own men lowered their eyes, ashamed by his defeat. With a final curse, he stormed away, his boots pounding the dirt, his shadow shrinking into the distance. Square was silent again, but it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of change. The villagers looked from her to the Apache, their faces torn between tradition and truth. The elder's shoulders sagged, his voice weary but resigned. The vows were not spoken. The union is not sealed. His eyes met hers, heavy with meaning. The choice is hers now, her heart pounded. For the first time, all eyes turned to her not as an object, not as a possession, but as a voice. She swallowed hard, her gaze moving from her father's weathered face to her friend's tear-streaked eyes, to the Apache standing tall, his vow unbroken. She drew a breath, her voice trembling but clear. "I will not marry a man I do not choose." Her words carried across the square, fragile yet fierce. "I choose my own life." Gasps rippled through the crowd, but no one spoke against her. Her father's face twisted with conflict, anger, fear, pride, and love all warring in his eyes. At last, his shoulders slumped. He looked at her, not as a daughter bound to his will, but as a woman standing in her own right. His voice cracked. As he spoke, "Then you are free." Tears burned her eyes. For so long, she had dreamed of freedom, but never believed it would come. And now, standing there with the whole village as witness, she felt the chains fall away. The Apache's gaze held hers, steady and burning, but he did not step closer. He waited, giving her space to decide, not demanding, not claiming. She turned to him, her heart racing. "You kept your vow." His lips curved, not into a smile but into something deeper, something that carried the weight of truth. "I said I would, and I will keep it still if you choose me." The village waited, breathless. Her father watched, broken but silent. The elder stood with heavy eyes, bearing witness to history. Her friend squeezed her hand, whispering, "Choose with your heart." And so she did. She stepped forward, her voice soft but certain. "I choose you." The square erupted not with outrage, but with awe. The villagers murmured, uncertain yet moved. The elder bowed his head, acknowledging the choice. Her father turned away, his pride wounded, but he did not stop her. And the Apache, steady and strong, reached out his hand. She placed hers in it, and for the first time, the world felt whole. The days that followed were not simple. The groom's family left the village in anger, vowing never to return. Whispers spread like wildfire across the plains of a girl who defied tradition, of an Apache who kept a vow, of a village changed forever. Some feared what the future would bring, others hoped for peace. But in the quiet moments, as she walked beside him beneath the wide sky, she felt something she had never known before. Not just freedom, but belonging. Her father, though wounded by pride, slowly came to see her. Happiness. He was a man built by tradition, but even he could not deny the light in her eyes when she stood beside the Apache. Over time, his anger cooled, replaced by a reluctant respect. Her friend remained by her side, helping her through the whispers, reminding her she was not alone. The Apache spoke little of his past, but as the seasons turned, he began to share. Fragments of the life he had known, the chains he had fought against, the vows he had made and lost. She listened, her heart aching for the pain he carried, but she also saw the strength that had carried him through. Together, they built something new, not the life her father had planned, not the life the village had expected, but a life shaped by choice, by vow, by freedom that the land itself seemed to shift with them. The river sang louder, the fields greener, the wind softer. Or perhaps it was simply her heart, now open, now unbound. The old village still stood, its fences worn, its porches sagging, but it was no longer a cage. It was a place where new stories could begin. And when the sun dipped low, painting the horizon in fire, she often remembered the moment it all changed, the vows spoken in shadows, the storm that shook the village, the choice that freed her. She would look at him, standing tall against the sky, his eyes steady and true, and she would whisper, "You saved me." He would shake his head, his voice quiet but sure. "No, you saved yourself. I only kept my vow." And so their story became more than whispers. It became a memory carried in the hearts of those who witnessed it, a tale told by firesides, a reminder that vows made in truth can break the heaviest chains. She had once feared her life would be stolen, bound by a forced marriage, her voice lost to silence. Instead, she had found not just freedom, but a love born of choice and courage. A vow that began with defiance had ended with a promise shared. And though the old village would always remember the day the Apache came, she would remember it not as the day of chaos, but as the day she first truly lived.